Okay, class, so what I've done here is I've just opened up a sample image and I've made it black and white. The only reason I've made it black and white is just so that we can focus on the distribution of density or tone. I didn't want to have variations in RGB for color. Okay, so we're just going to focus on the tone. We've removed color out of the equation. And what I've done is I've just gone through and, because I guess a little picky, I've got rid of some of the weird white stuff in the grass. So what we're going to do here is take a look at my info panel. Now, as I go through the image, there is a greater distribution of tone. As I'm looking at the shadow side of the building, I see the tone is 56 RGB. I go to the light side of the building, it's 138. Now I know this image is about a stop or so underexposed. I know this because I purposefully underexposed it for the sake of using it in class. Beyond the info panel, what I can do is I can check out the histogram. Now, it's a little bit tough if I'm trying to find middle value because this is a building that is having light hit it in a very not necessarily even way. The light's kind of coming in here. The building itself is casting a shadow on itself, and there's varying edges and things like that. I'm going to have a hard time trying to find a specific area that I want to use. If I look at my histogram, I can see because there's a very large gap here, I know it's underexposed. So if I were to bring this from Capture One into Photoshop in the state, I would have to do a global density correction. Now in Capture One, I could do my adjustments there using the exposure slider. It's ultimately adjusting density. In Photoshop, what I'm going to use is a curve. Now remember, I've talked about in class how the brightness contrast and exposure sliders are dead to you. That's ultimately because I want you guys to start using curves to make your adjustments. Although yes, you can use the exposure slider, and the exposure tool to adjust exposure. You don't have much control. As you can see, I can just increase or decrease. I don't have the ability to actually kind of pinpoint what I want to use. That's why we don't. That's why I don't use those. I prefer to use curves because I can actually come in and increase certain areas of my image and then make other adjustments. You have more control. Anywho, I digress. So what I want to do is, because I'm looking at my histogram in this particular image, I want to see a more even distribution of tones. Remember, the histogram is a graph that tells us or shows us basically the distribution of pixels. So just like in Capture One, the left side is 0, the right side is 255, and then the middle is going to be that middle value. Most of my information is kind of to the left, meaning that I don't have a lot of tone from middle value up. I want to fix that. So I'm going to use a curve adjustment layer. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to density. And what I'm going to do is through and adjust density with my new density curve. So to do this, I'm just going to grab from the middle value, and I'm going to increase the density because I want to lighten up the image. I want to increase that collection of light. So let's do this. Now, the histogram is not going to move in real time, just like in Capture One, but as soon as I finish my adjustment, it will move. There we go. So I'm just increasing this a little bit more. There we go. So I'm trying to make this even now. I do have gas from right and left, but we'll talk about that now. Actually, we'll talk about that now. Ultimately, because I'm excuse me, using Photoshop to increase the density, it's kind of compressing the tone a little bit. To fix that, I would just add contrast after the fact to the image. So right now I'm just getting my density correction the way I want it to be. So if I turn that layer off, I can see what the histogram used to look like. I can turn the layer on, and I can see what the histogram does look like. Now I have these funny little lines in my histogram and a little arrow. The caution sign, not the arrow, in the histogram, is telling me something's been changed. I need to update it. If I click on this, it'll just update the histogram. Now the reason why I have these lines is because density correction in Photoshop isn't necessarily damaging, but it can lower the quality of an image depending on how far you go. I wouldn't, again, flatline a curve, and I also wouldn't try to recover an image that's several stops under or overexposed in Photoshop. But if I do need to create a density correction, I can. Now, typically what you would use this for is if you were printing and things like that. Certain paper types, as Bowie will explain to you, require density adjustments. And that totally depends upon the paper and ink type you're using. If I look at my info panel, and I go over to the actual building, I can see what I've actually changed. It went from 133 RGB to 201 RGB. And if I come down on my grass, it went from 14 to 25. Now, Bowie's going to talk about this, but printers, they tend to not print detail from about 15 RGB to 0, which means my grass would have been pure black if I went to go print that. But now that it's at 25 RGB, there'll actually be detail there. On the opposite end, usually it's 245 to 255 in the whites. Now I'm not worried about that in this image just because this image was underexposed, not overexposed. So that tells me how I would adjust the density in this particular case. Now I wouldn't stop here. I would actually go through and I would adjust my contrast. So I'm going to increase the shoulder and I'm going to decrease the toe a little bit just to add a bit more interest. And I'm going to take a look at my grass, and the values are 18, 19, so I'm okay. I know that a printer is going to be able to print that if I wanted to make a print. And I'm going to look and see if there's anything above 245, and the only thing that'll be above 245 in this case is the light, and I don't really care that much if it has detail because it's a light. And there's my contrast, and of course we're going to name that to, I usually just put CONT for short for contrast. There you go. That's how we can adjust the density in a particular image using the histogram, the info panel, and curves, and then add contrast. There you go, guys. That is a global density correction in an image in a practical sense.